everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to your conference that is being hosted in Karachi. I've been listening in to some of the previous discussion. It's clearly a very dynamic, lively discussion you're having about the future of education. We live in a very complicated time. Some of these complications are exciting, some of them are frightening, and some of them are simply complicated. And it's these complications that raise questions about what is our best way to manage change in the current circumstances, and also what is the best way to lead the management of change in those circumstances. And these are the things that I want to share with you and talk about with you today. My name is Professor Andrew Hargreaves. I'm speaking from Ottawa in Canada on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people, which I want to acknowledge as the platform upon which that I speak now. So, what are these complications that are in the world around us? Well, they're not hard to ignore. Some of them are really frightening. Climate change and pollution is a massive issue. I've just been looking at the world weather, and Lahore is having its most polluted day in history today. The normal healthy score for particles in the air is 50, and Lahore today has a score of 700. We are seeing climate change and disruptions threatening many parts of the world with floods and fires and storms and high winds and disruption. There is no part of the planet that is escaping this, and it makes us think about what our children should be learning and also how to manage the crises and disruptions when they happen in our school systems, when we have to close schools because of storms or floods or damage or whatever it might be. This is what we had to think about during the pandemic. Also, when there were school closures all over the world, we had to go online much of the time. So, some of it was good and very dynamic. A lot of it was terrible when children were trapped at home, away from their, particularly teenagers, away from their friends, their peer group, their sense of who they were. So we have to figure out how to respond in crises during pandemics, because the evidence is there'll be more pandemics. The one we just had isn't the last one. We can expect them to come. There's war, there's conflict. Many young people now, according to surveys by the Red Cross, fear that there will be a nuclear war in their lifetime. They fear for climate change. They fear about the future. They wonder, according to a Red Cross survey of 13 different countries, they wonder and they worry whether they should even have children of their own, if this is a world worth bringing them into. So we have these kinds of complexities that are really threatening and challenging. We have some that are more optimistic, perhaps, or at least have an optimistic side. So this whole conference is about AI and artificial intelligence. Yeah, you'll have seen most of the debates about this now in my own city, in a school district near me. They're not just talking about it, but they're using it. They're using it to help them streamline assessments, to draft letters to parents, so they don't have to write every letter or every email from absolutely from scratch. They're using it as frameworks for curriculum planning, so you can put into your curriculum plan what kind of unit you want, how many lessons you want, what kind of students you have, what sort of activities you are thinking about. And then AI will basically sketch out a plan for you. So the point of AI is not to write your lessons for you or do your assessments for you. it is to take some of the early work out of the planning process as a teacher, so you can still use your judgment, you still know your students, but the time you save can be freed up to do other things, perhaps the more complicated learning outcomes. So there are threats with AI to privacy, to intellectual property, to authorship, to all those things, but also great promises at the same time. And then some of the complications are just complicated. So one of my books I'm not talking about today is this book with my colleague Dennis Shirley on the age of identity. And we'll talk a little bit about this shortly, but the issue with identity is our identities are important. They're part of who we are. Developing the person is and their character and what they belong to is one of the prime purposes of education. It's not just about maths and science and literacy. We're talking about human development too. But in a world of great movement and great migration, identities are more complicated. So many people now are not of a single race; they're of mixed race. All my five grandchildren, for example, are uh, are are mixed race. We have mixtures by social class and economic status when people are mobile over their life and careers. We have mixtures by nationality. People often belong to two nations or more nations now, rather than one. So identities are not just there and important, but they're also complicated. And a book I could recommend on this that you might enjoy is this book by the Punjabi British actor Jasa Alawalia. He's Punjabi British, and this new book is called Both Not Half, and it's how to understand and deal with a history and a world and a surrounding culture where we're dealing with multiple identities, not singular identities. And at this point, I'll move to my slides to just try and sum up what it is I've said, and then to set out what we will be looking at through the rest of this presentation. So if we can go to the slides now, we do have one small technical problem, so I'm afraid I'll have to say go to slide one or slide two or what have you. But if the organizers now can move to the slides and perhaps move to slide one. That will show you the book that I'm basically sharing with you today on leadership from the middle. The closer we get, the better we lead. What that is saying is the closer we get to the practice, to the people we know, to the unique identities and culture of our schools, the better we'll lead. And also, the closer we get to each other, the better we will lead at the same time. So there are two senses to this phrase. And then if we can go to slide two, you can see a kind of volcano here. And this is a metaphor, really, for what young people and their teachers are experiencing in the world. So, on the one side, there's a lot of pressure, like the geological pressure, for continuing pressures for standards, for competition, for results compared to other nations around the world. And particularly an issue here is that in many nations, perhaps not in Pakistan, but in many nations, the problem used to be the problem that there wasn't enough upward mobility. So the opportunity for people from lowly beginnings to rise up in status through education over the course of their life. That's been a problem for 50 years and more. But we now have a new problem too in many nations, and that is downward mobility, particularly in the OECD economies. Many nations now, middle class parents, are experiencing that their children may never be as well off as they were at their age. So this puts enormous pressure on education around the world, from the middle classes especially, to try not only to get advantage, but for those who have those advantages to maintain their advantage and their status. So on the one side, we have all this pressure and all this competition. And on the other side, we have this phenomenon called VUCA. VUCA was a term invented by the military in the 1980s. It went into business and now it is in public sector and not for profit. It stands for volatility, which means things are up and down, like the climate, like economies. Things are extremely volatile. Uncertainty, we really don't know what's going to happen next. Complexity, like identity, we can't really standardize our solutions to things. The world is complex, people are complex, and ambiguity. It's not always clear with the problems we face, like vaccines, for example, what is the exact correct answer. So we have to use our judgment. So when you see these two pressures on young people and their teachers and schools, the question is how do we deal with change and how do we deal with the leadership of change? So could we go to slide 3? And on slide 3, way to think about this is with what I call the 3 I's of change. They are implementation, inclusion, which is one of your 5 conference themes, and also innovation, which runs throughout the conference. So let's take these one by one. I want to spend most time on the third, but let's take these one by one. Think about change first, and then think about leadership. So slide 4, please, if you would now. So slide 4 shows you really what traditional models of implementation look like. So in these, you usually have a problem. So for example, across the world now, there's a problem of student absenteeism after COVID. Students are not going back to school. In some countries, chronic absenteeism is as high as 50% now. In countries like the UK, the country of my birth, rates of absenteeism are up 150%. And in the US, we're seeing this with children from privileged families who can now learn online and be coached by their parents, and not just in poorer families. So what you get with something like absenteeism is or anything else, there's a problem. And then immediately a group of people in policy figure out what they think the problem is and come up with a solution. So the typical responses to absenteeism are raising the expectations for student attendance and intervening in the homes and families to get them to make their children come to school. We check, we try to deliver that policy. Favorite term is delivering policy now. We measure, we have indicators, so we know is absenteeism improving, or children attending more, and then at the end we evaluate whether the policy's been effective. So a question I have for you that I'm going to ask you to hold in your head for a few seconds, then we'll move to the next slide, not just next, is, is what percentage of policies never get implemented? So just think for a second, what percent of policies globally never get implemented? Well, let's go to slide 5. And on slide 5, you'll see really what the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, recently found in a study of hundreds of policies over several decades and what happened to them in education. And the authors of this study, the lead author is somebody called Beatrice Pont, who's very high up in OECD, is that over 80% of policies never get implemented. Over 80%, 4 out of 5 policies never get implemented. Now, if you go to some places who've used this data, like McKinsey and Company, for example, they will tell you, as they did a few weeks ago online, that they've really not been driving the traditional implementation model hard enough. So they'll say you need a small group of people at the top who decide what to do. They focus on 2 or 3 things. They then deliver them according to a fairly strict rollout program of training and materials. They have targets for when their delivery will happen, and then they measure whether they've reached those targets. But the OECD, who came up with this study, said, actually, that's not the solution. That's the problem. So we see a difference here between McKinsey, on the one hand, who are very active within your region, for example, and the OECD on the other hand. So what are the OECD saying is the answer? Well, could we go to slide 6, please? And on slide 6, you'll see a rather complicated diagram, but try and imagine that it's a clock, and look in the orange sector between about 3 and 6 o'clock. And what you see there are ways of capturing the essential idea that if we want to implement policy, whether it's a national policy, or whether it's a school policy, or whether it's a policy for your network of schools, then the people affected by the policy have to be involved in its development. The policies have to be co-created by those who are involved. And at the extreme, this actually means involving students, young people, in the creation of policies. Now, this might sound crazy to you, but let me give you a really good example. Last year, the year before last, I was involved in an OECD study of Ireland, the country Ireland. During COVID, Ireland had a real problem with how to assess its students when they were going to university. Uh, Before COVID, 100% of a student's future, the decision about whether or where they went to university, was decided by a sit-down examination. COVID took that away. So we were invited, a team of 4 of us, 2 from the OECD and 2 experts, to evaluate what happened during COVID and what the consequences were. One of the things we learned is that during COVID, as the OECD found, Ireland was one of those countries where instead of somebody at the top of the system deciding whether you should stay in school, not stay in school, what the learning online should look like, how you should or you shouldn't assess your students. That Ireland was one of the better countries where every week a group of people would meet together, health professionals, teachers, school principals, parents' organizations, for example. And every week they would respond to what the crisis was that week collaboratively. And the people in Ireland, right up to the highest level of policy, said the effectiveness of that approach was transformed once the school students' union was involved. The students surveyed 20,000 of their members. They collected more data than anybody else in Ireland collected. And this created a transformative approach to how to deal with and respond to COVID. So, with implementation, this is the first thing. If we want to do better than only 20% or less of our policies and strategies being implemented, we have to include the people who are affected. We cannot lead from the top. We cannot just drive things from the top. We have to co-create. We have to lead together in developing new policy. The second I is inclusion. And so could we go to slide 7, please? This is from a book by Shelley Moore. Shelley Moore is an assistant professor in British Columbia in Canada, in Vancouver. And she's written a book called One Without the Other, which is about inclusion. Now, what Shelley Moore means by inclusion, which many people do now, is inclusion not just of students with special educational needs. This is where inclusion began, but also inclusion by many other aspects of identity and need, language, indigenous status and identity, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, religion, and age and generation. So, what she has here are 5 circles to try and represent different ways that we think about inclusion. And for a second, I'd just like you to look at these circles and to think, and perhaps when you go back to your schools and organizations, think, what do they say about my organization, where it's been, where it is, and where we want it to be? So just take a look. Now, the key color here is green. So what Shelley Moore is trying to say here is 3 things, really. One is, if you move across the circles, we began where children who were different were excluded from the school. And then they were put into separate schools in the second circle. And then we started to think about how we could accommodate them by creating a group of them within the school. And then in the fourth circle, we'd bring in people to help individuals with differences of language or autism, for example. And that's where we see the colors start to be scattered a bit amongst the greens. But what she says here, which is the second thing, is that there are, by the fourth circle, we still have this idea that green is normal, that we have children who are normal and children who are different. But by the time you get to the fifth circle, she says, we're really thinking of neurodiversity and the argument that there's no such thing as normal. There's no such thing as normal. We're all, in a way, unique. Now, this doesn't mean that sometimes, on some aspects of identity, that we shouldn't gather together with people like us. Sometimes I like to be with people of my own generation, for example, though many times I like to be with other generations. She gives the example of children with Down syndrome. So she says sometimes children with Down syndrome want to be with other children with Down syndrome. They share things in common. So that's okay sometimes, but it probably shouldn't be all the time. And they shouldn't be forced to be with other children with the same identity. It should be a choice. So she's trying to get us to think identity is complex, inclusion is complex. We're very diverse, and there's no such thing as normal. Now, in slide 8, probably many of you will know the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. And what I'm trying to capture here in this slide is that in that fifth circle, the idea that there's no such thing as normal is both challenging and exciting. But at the same time, if you're a teacher, it's frightening that you have to know everything about everybody all the time. And when you have many children in your class, this is overwhelming. And so there's an answer to this. And again, it is about leadership. And the answer is it can't just be me as an individual who has to know everything about everybody. It has to be us as a community who knows everything about everybody. So go to slide 9. And this reports the findings of a study that my colleague Jess Whitley and I did in a province of Canada recently, including during COVID, where we evaluated on an ongoing basis how they were implementing their inclusion strategy on the lines that I showed you in Shelley Moore's diagram. We're drawing on the traditional research on implementation. We created some indicators of implementation. You can see them there from early to advanced. And then we correlated in a survey of school principals, we correlated what they said about how advanced their principal was with a range of other indicators, things like how much professional development there was, for example. And if you go to slide 10, we see two of the best predictors of a full or advanced implementation. We're both concerned with collaboration, with leading collaboratively. The second highest predictor of full implementation was how well school principals developed collaboration within their own schools, amongst their teachers. So the more that teachers work together, if a child had a problem, the more they focused on the child's problem together, the more likely they were to come up with successful strategies, that they brought all their knowledge of the child collectively. But the highest predictor of implementation, interestingly, was how well principals collaborated with principals in other schools. So many of the problems I've described, inclusion, AI, disruption, when you have them, they feel unique. The research won't automatically tell you what to do. There isn't a standardized answer. So what do? You contact somebody else to see if they've had a similar problem. And with the different experiences you have, you figure out together what the answer might be. Interestingly, by the way, I was reading research last week from Germany which is very new, a big survey of networks in Germany, that public schools are good at internal collaboration, but very weak on external collaboration, whereas private schools are very strong on external collaboration, but much weaker on internal collaboration. So you might want to take that away with you and think about that for discussion. So that's the second I. I want to take you now on to the third one, and let's go to slide 11. In September of 2022, at the United Nations General Assembly, Secretary Gutierrez was persuaded to respond to the global crisis in the teaching profession, the crisis of recruitment, a crisis of retention, and a crisis really of value, and recognition by creating a commission, a global commission, a high-level panel of 17 former ministers and union leaders. And they reported this year in February, and they came up with 59 recommendations. So again, well, as I'm talking next, I want you to hold in your head, if you were to make a recommendation on how to really improve the future of teaching, what would that recommendation be? What would that recommendation be? Now, many of the findings would be similar to ones we've been saying for years and that you would know. We need to increase the pay of teachers. The one thing, by the way, the World Bank will never do. But we need to increase the pay of teachers. We need to talk teachers up in government, in the media, to our own students, to our own families. We need to give teaching more status. We need to reduce the workload of teachers. AI could help us with that, for example. And we need to pay attention to the well-being of teachers as much as to the well-being of our students, because if your teacher's sick, your children aren't going to be well. So all these are fairly familiar recommendations. But you know, the high-level panel commissioned 6 expert papers. And one of those expert papers was mine. And I said something based on new work I've been doing, something a little bit different. Could we go to slide 12, please? And that is this, that if we want to improve the status and attractiveness of teaching, we have to change how the job feels. The job can't just be teaching standardized lessons from the front in the same way to a whole group of students. Indeed, after COVID, our students are questioning whether really they should be going to school anymore. We've broken the habit of schooling for our kids, and we've broken the habit of schooling for our teachers too. So we need to think about ways in which we make the job of learning more exciting and the job of teaching more exciting. And slide 13, please. So this means more innovation. Now, it doesn't mean more innovations like the bucket of ice water here. It doesn't mean making teachers introduce more innovations that have been created outside. Rather, it means creating a culture, a climate, a leadership in a school that encourages and enables teachers to design their own innovations. Not all week, not for all subjects, but for some of the week, for some of the subjects that really work for them and that really work for their students. So slide 14. So I want to tell you about 4 schools and then draw to a close what we're talking about today. And these 4 schools come out of slide 15. If you go to slide 15, come out of a project that my colleagues and I did just after COVID. That was funded by the Lego Foundation, nearly $3 million, to create a network of 41 schools in Canada to help them design innovations for students who've been most marginalized by COVID-19. Students with special needs, students of low income, students who were immigrants, students who were indigenous, for example. They could focus on innovations that were screen, digital, machine, robotics, or cardboard, or metal. Green, which is outdoors, learning in nature, and everything in between, which are things to do with language or social studies, for example. And in each school, a team of 4 teachers that might involve the principal, but was not led by the principal, applied to join the project, decided what their innovation would be. Often it was a combination of all these elements, and then networked with other schools online on a platform we created, and also face to face in a national and a regional set of conferences. So it was based in teams, it was run by teachers. It had a lot of flexibility about what they could devise, and it was related to their own schools. Gave them a little bit of money, about $5,000 to spend in any way they wished, particularly on time, so that they could meet together outside their classes. So I'm just going to show you very quickly 4 schools, and I want you to think in terms of leadership, which one reminds you most of you? So the first school was a school in slide 16, was a school that had 2 teachers who were team teachers. They've been team teaching for many years. They recruited 2 other teachers, and they were very innovative all the time, even before this project. They made a film festival that they showed to the community. They wrote a script, they wrote scripts, they dressed up, they had costumes, they acted it out. They used green screen technology to film it. They used coding in order to develop editing and to edit their movies. So there was a lot of language, there were different kinds of digital technologies. The thing about the leadership here, the leadership from the middle, is that these 4 teachers worked really well together, but the rest of the school was not involved. Not only was it not involved, including the principal, by the way, it was opposed. At best, it let them get on with what they were doing. But many other teachers thought, this looks like really hard work, and I want to define my job more narrowly and go home at the end of the day and not be creating new curriculum all the time. So this team of teachers could develop terrific innovation amongst themselves. They could network with other teachers in other schools, but they had no power or agency or skill to spread their innovation, their leadership across their whole school. Does this remind you of you? Slide 17. The second school is a school on the east of Canada, where there was very little movement of teachers in the province. Many teachers were near retirement. The number of students was shrinking. There was no movement of teachers. Teachers didn't want to change. The principal felt she couldn't change the teachers, so instead they focused on well-being. I asked them, what was she changing the learning at all? And she said, no, I can't persuade the teachers to teach differently. So we concentrated on well-being. So for instance, on the left, they had a calming room for when students got anxious or angry, that they could go and calm down in and then come back to class. Or on the right, they have many immigrants in the school, so they had flags of the world welcoming immigrants, so they felt like they belonged. They had clothes, winter clothes, for used clothes for children from low-income families or recently arrived families. So in this school, what they were doing was not changing the learning, but changing the things that they believed supported the learning. Now, the reason I say this is my colleague Dennis Shirley and I have written a recent book called Wellbeing in Schools. And in this book, it talks about often, well-being is a support for learning, but sometimes governments and schools take the safe option. They don't support the learning. They just try to calm the children down and make them feel better so that they can cope more easily with the learning as it is. But the learning doesn't change. Does this school remind you of you? And then I'm going to give two more examples and then draw this to a close. So slide 18, please. In slide 18, we had a low-income community with a lot of unemployment, and they decided to grow healthy food for the community. They grew it indoors. Here you see a thing called a grow tower because it's very cold in Canada in the winters. They wrote recipes to cook food based on what they grew. They developed QR codes to link the recipes to music they could play that was related to the ethnicity of the restaurant, of the recipes. Slide 19, please. There was racism in the community. So the school took children out to local restaurants to eat different food, to meet people who owned the restaurants, to talk about their lives, their backgrounds, their identities, really to create positive relationships around racial and ethnic difference. And this had very positive effects on things like absenteeism. You want to cure absenteeism, you have to make children want to come to school because of the excitement of the learning. But the thing about this school is, one of the teachers on the team at first didn't want to be on the team. She believed her children were falling behind in grade 7 and grade 8, and they needed to spend more time on literacy and on mathematics in a standardized, top-down way. She really cared about the children, but she was quite strict in an old-fashioned way. She didn't think the children should be playing. What she said was, as a metaphor, I don't want to be on a bus. The children are driving, and I don't know where the bus is going. But the principal kept saying to her, no, you're the one. You're the one. We need you. We need you for this project. So the teacher said, eventually, because she liked the principal, okay, I'll do it. It won't work, but I'll do it. When she did, she found, as she told us, it did work. And she learned that her children were capable of doing things she never imagined herself. In this school 3, it wasn't a group of isolated teachers, nor was it a principal who focused on the well-being because it was too hard to get the teachers to change. But the principal focused on changing her teachers. And at the beginning, she got not only teachers who were enthusiastic, but teachers who were a little bit resistant, who questioned, because once she had those teachers could connect with the other teachers who were also resistant and also questioned. Does this remind you of you? And then slide 20, but please don't play the audio. So don't click on the audio, but just show slide 20 if you would. Here's a 4th school where there's a teacher leader, a teacher librarian, who's playing with tiny little ozobots. They're about the size of an egg or smaller. They're robots that move according to tracks that you trace with a pen, and you can put bits of coding on the tracks so the ozobots can move faster or slower. In this school, it wasn't just about the technology. They wrote a story based on the local culture, based on local community and literature and traditions. They then created a whole scene on a huge table with a painted background and bridges and roads, buildings they made out of 3D printers, little people who populated it. And then they dressed up the Ozobots, these tiny Ozobots, in little costumes. So the Ozobots could move across the scene that they'd created as they were reading the story. The key thing about this is that this teacher I'm showing you here is the one who has a passion for these Ozobots and for the whole project. And she was never interested in technology, but she's developed such capacity that other teachers now come to her, and she manages the server for the whole school. She has something that all the other teachers need. So in number 4, there's a teacher leader who has something the other teachers need, and the skills and the dynamism to be able to involve all those teachers, not just a small group who already agree with her. So are you the first, a group of teachers out on their own? The second, a school that can't change the learning, so it changes the well-being? A third, where the principal really knows how to motivate her teachers, even those who are skeptical? Or a fourth, which is a teacher leader who knows how to step up, step forward, and take the leadership herself, including teachers who are different as well as ones who are the same. And now would you move on, please, to slide 25. So I'm going to miss a few slides because this is really how I want to draw us all to a close today. So on slide 25, I just want to say this is what leadership from the middle means in your school. There are some people, including McKinsey, who say leading from the middle is really, it's a technical thing. It's about implementing other people's stuff. It's the old delivery model. It's having middle leaders who are there to take on the job that the principals don't want to do, to order the books or run meetings or do the teacher evaluations. But really, the model is still very top down. So the person in the middle, like we often think about the middle, is just a level or a layer or a connector. They have almost no identity of their own if you look on the left-hand side. The job's all about improving the performance, not creating innovation and excitement in the learning. It's about making everything more efficient, more coherent, getting alignment, as we talk about, getting things to fit together, and about implementing things that people at the top or people at the outside have decided to do. So today, I'm trying with you not just to make a case for the importance of the middle, but really to explain and to persuade you that we need to think about this middle differently. And that is going to the right-hand side. We need to think about the middle not as a level or a layer or a tier, but the middle like our bodies, like our souls, a more female metaphor of the middle, which is more biological, more about the core, the spine, the heart, the soul of who we are as a community. The middle that is together, stepping forward and stepping up, not just to implement other people's stuff, but to transform teaching and learning for the future with technology, by going outdoors, using robotics, bringing all these things together. And that this middle becomes not just lined up or has a bit of coherence, but it's a strong, cohesive community that takes collective responsibility for all young people's success and advancement. And that these people in the middle, like the last teacher I showed you, don't just implement other people's initiatives, but they step forward and they take the initiative themselves. So we live in a VUCA world that is highly competitive. We can no longer drive things from the top. They're not effective, they're not responsive. If we want better implementation, we have to do that collectively. We have to co-create policy together in our nation, in our networks, and in our schools. If we want inclusion, we can't know everything about everybody ourselves as individuals, but we need to take collective responsibility, bringing together everything we know about our child and our community. And if we want to reduce absenteeism in school and increase recruitment and retention in teaching, we have to draw teachers in and we have to draw children in by creating these environments with more innovation, more engagement, more excitement about learning. That doesn't mean just a few experiments on the edge. It doesn't mean just initiatives in supporting learning as it is. It doesn't even, but it means principals and teacher leaders stepping forward to create communities where every school can design and develop innovations together that suit the children they know best. And that this will not only make the children want to come in the school, but it will make the teachers want to come in and stay in the school as well. This is leadership from the middle. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your conference.